My name is Beverly, and I'm 32 years old. Growing up, I always thought family meant unconditional love and protection. I believed that no matter what happened, your parents would stand by you and siblings would have your back. That naive belief nearly cost me everything. The day of my brother Marcus's 16th birthday party was supposed to be a celebration, but it became the worst nightmare of my life. As I watched him smirking at me across the crowded living room that afternoon, I felt an uncomfortable knot forming in my stomach. Something about his expression told me he had planned something, but I never imagined it would change my life forever. Before I share this heartbreaking story with you, please let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that like button if you believe families should protect each other, and don't forget to subscribe because I have so much more to share about overcoming life's biggest challenges. Now let me tell you about the day that shattered everything I thought I knew about family. Let me paint you a picture of my family dynamics, because understanding this context is crucial to what happened next. My father Robert was a construction engineer who believed in tough love and never showing weakness. He stood 6 feet tall with calloused hands and a permanent scowl that deepened whenever he looked at me. My mother Janet worked at First National Bank as a loan officer, always impeccably dressed and concerned about appearances above all else. She had this way of smiling sweetly while delivering the cruelest remarks. Then there was Marcus, my younger brother by 16 years. Where I had struggled in school and worked part-time jobs since I was 14 to buy my own clothes and supplies, Marcus was the golden child who could do no wrong. He was naturally gifted, academically charming when he wanted to be, and possessed an intelligence that he used primarily to manipulate situations to his advantage. Our parents showered him with expensive gaming systems, the latest sneakers, and anything else his heart desired. Growing up, I learned early that in our household, Marcus's needs came first always. When I was 10 and Marcus was 2, I remember asking for a new backpack because mine had a broken zipper. Mom told me we couldn't afford it, but 3 days later, Marcus got a $50 toy truck just because he pointed at it in the store. When I was 16 and saving money for a prom dress, Marcus broke my ceramic piggy bank and spent my money on comic books. When I cried to my parents, they said accidents happen and I shouldn't be so materialistic. The pattern continued into adulthood. I became an elementary school teacher, finding joy in nurturing children who reminded me of my younger self. I had been living with my boyfriend David for 2 years, but our relationship ended when I discovered he was cheating. With nowhere else to go and needing time to save for a new apartment, I reluctantly moved back into my childhood bedroom 3 months before Marcus's birthday. Our family lived in a 2-story colonial house with white siding and black shutters. The wooden staircase creaked with each step, and the second-floor balcony overlooked our backyard patio made of unforgiving concrete. The balcony had wrought iron railings that stood about 3 feet high, definitely not designed for safety but for aesthetics. I had always found that balcony beautiful, but somehow ominous, especially on windy days when the railings seemed to sway slightly. Living back home meant witnessing Marcus's behavior more closely. He had developed into a master manipulator who could switch from charming to cruel within seconds. He would break things and blame me, knowing our parents would believe him. He once deleted an important work presentation from my laptop and told our parents I was lying when I accused him. They grounded me for being dramatic and making false accusations. But what truly unnerved me were his recent pranks. Marcus had become obsessed with YouTube prank videos, spending hours watching elaborate schemes that often resulted in someone getting hurt. He would laugh at videos where people fell down stairs or got injured, and I caught him researching dangerous pranks on his phone late at night. When I mentioned this to our parents, Dad said boys will be boys, and Mom accused me of being jealous of Marcus's creativity. The week leading up to his birthday, Marcus kept mentioning a surprise he had planned. He would catch my eye across the dinner table and smile in a way that made my skin crawl. He started asking strange questions about my schedule, whether I would definitely be home for his party, and if I was afraid of heights. These questions seemed innocent enough to our parents, but they filled me with an inexplicable dread that I couldn't shake off. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonably warm April weather perfect for Marcus's outdoor birthday celebration. I woke up at 7 a.m. to help Mom prepare for the party that would start at 2 p.m. The guest list included 15 of Marcus's school friends, several neighbors, and a few relatives who doted on him shamelessly. I spent the morning blowing up balloons, hanging streamers, and arranging folding chairs in our backyard. Mom had ordered a massive chocolate cake from the expensive bakery downtown, decorated with a fondant figure of Marcus's favorite video game character. As I worked, I noticed Marcus sleeping until nearly noon, which wasn't unusual for a weekend, but he typically got excited and woke up early on special occasions. When Marcus finally emerged from his room, he seemed different. There was an energy about him that I couldn't quite identify, like he was barely containing his excitement about something. He kept checking his phone, texting with his friends, and occasionally letting out little chuckles that made me pause in my preparations. Several times I caught him staring at me with an expression I had never seen before, calculating and almost predatory. Around 11 a.m., I decided to take a break and went to the kitchen for water. That's when I saw Marcus's laptop open on the counter, displaying a YouTube video titled, "Epic Balcony Pranks That Will Shock You." My blood ran cold as I watched teenagers pushing their siblings off porches and balconies with comments praising the pranksters for their creativity. I quickly closed the laptop, but the images burned into my memory. I tried talking to Mom about what I had seen, but she was busy arranging flowers and dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "Beverly, honey, you're being paranoid again. Marcus is just a normal teenager who likes funny videos. Stop trying to create drama on his special day." Her tone carried that familiar edge of irritation she reserved specifically for me. By 1:30 p.m., guests began arriving. Marcus transformed into the perfect host, greeting everyone with hugs and his most charming smile. Parents complimented Mom and Dad on what a wonderful young man they had raised. Teachers from his school gushed about his academic achievements. Everyone seemed genuinely fond of him, and I began to wonder if I was indeed being paranoid about the video and his strange behavior. The party proceeded normally through the afternoon. We played games in the backyard. Marcus opened presents with appropriate enthusiasm and gratitude, and everyone sang happy birthday as he blew out 16 candles. He received gift cards, video games, clothes, and electronics that probably totaled more than I spent on myself in 6 months. But I couldn't shake the feeling that Marcus was performing for an audience, biding his time until some predetermined moment. His closest friends, particularly his best friend Tyler, and another boy named Jake, kept whispering among themselves and glancing at me with barely suppressed grins. At one point, I heard Tyler ask Marcus, "Are you still planning the thing for later?" Marcus shushed him quickly, but not before I caught the exchange. As the afternoon wore on and some guests began leaving, Marcus announced that he wanted family photos to commemorate his special day. This wasn't unusual, as Mom always insisted on documentation for important occasions. However, when he specifically requested that we take photos on the upstairs balcony because the lighting would be better there, I felt that familiar knot of anxiety forming in my stomach once again. Evening approached as the last few guests prepared to leave, and exhaustion weighed heavily on my shoulders after a full day of hosting duties. I had been looking forward to retreating to my room, taking a hot shower, and finally relaxing with a book. The kitchen was full of dirty dishes, wrapping paper littered the living room, and I knew I would be the one cleaning everything up the next morning while Marcus slept in. Just as I started gathering empty plates from the patio table, Marcus appeared beside me with unusual enthusiasm. "Beverly, we need to take those family photos before everyone goes home. Mom specifically asked for pictures on the balcony since the sunset will create the perfect backdrop." His tone was casual, but something about the way he avoided direct eye contact made me hesitate. I glanced toward the house and saw Mom inside talking with the remaining guests. She hadn't mentioned anything to me about photos, but it wouldn't be the first time Marcus had volunteered me for something without asking. "I'm really tired, Marcus. Can't we just take them down here in the backyard? The lighting is fine." "Come on, Beverly. Don't be difficult. It's my birthday and I want nice photos with my family. Dad already agreed, and he's waiting upstairs. Marcus's voice carried a hint of the whining tone he used when he wanted something from our parents. Besides Tyler and Jake want to help take the pictures. They're really good with cameras. The mention of his friends wanting to help struck me as odd. Why would teenage boys be interested in taking family photos? But Marcus was already walking toward the house, calling over his shoulder, "Hurry up! Everyone's waiting." Against my better judgment, I followed him inside and up the creaking staircase to the second floor. The hallway felt narrower than usual, and I noticed that Tyler and Jake were indeed waiting near the balcony door, both holding their phones as if ready to record. Dad stood near the railing looking impatient and checking his watch. "There you are," Dad grumbled when he saw me. "Marcus has been planning this photo session all week. Let's get this done quickly so these boys can head home before dark." The balcony felt more cramped than I remembered, with 5 people crowded onto it. The wrought iron railing suddenly seemed lower and less substantial than it had from a distance. Below us, the concrete patio stretched out unforgivingly at least 12 feet down. The height had never bothered me before, but standing there in the fading daylight, I felt dizzy. Marcus directed everyone's positioning with unusual precision. "Dad, you stand over there by the door. Beverly, come stand right here by the railing so we can see the sunset behind you. Tyler, make sure you get the whole balcony in the shot." He seemed to have thought through every detail of this arrangement. As I moved toward the spot, Marcus indicated something felt fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. Tyler and Jake were grinning at each other in a way that reminded me of the expressions I had seen in those prank videos. Marcus kept glancing at his phone as if timing something. The rational part of my brain screamed that I should leave immediately, but I didn't want to create a scene and ruin what remained of Marcus's birthday. "Actually, let me just get my phone for the photos," I said, starting to move toward the door. But Marcus quickly stepped sideways, blocking my path, while maintaining his innocent smile. "I've got it covered, Beverly. Just stand right there and smile. This will only take a minute." His voice carried an edge I had never heard before, and for the first time in my life, I felt genuinely afraid of my younger brother. Tyler raised his phone as if to take a picture, but I could see the screen was actually showing a video recording interface. Jake positioned himself on my other side, closer to the railing than seemed necessary for a photo. The setup felt like a trap, and I was standing directly in the center of it. "Marcus, I really think we should do this some other time. I don't feel comfortable up here right now." I tried to keep my voice steady, but I could hear the tremor of fear creeping in. Maybe we could just take pictures inside instead. But Marcus was no longer pretending to smile. His expression had shifted into something cold and calculating that I had never seen before. "Don't ruin this for me, Beverly. You always ruin everything. Just stand still and let us take the damn pictures." That's when I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was about to happen, it wasn't going to be a simple family photo session. What happened next unfolded in a series of moments that seemed to stretch and compress simultaneously, like time itself had become unreliable. I was standing with my back to the railing facing Marcus and his friends when I saw him give an almost imperceptible nod. Before I could process what that signal meant, Tyler and Jake moved toward me with sudden coordination that spoke of careful planning. "Hey, Beverly, look over here," Tyler called out, holding up his phone. As I instinctively turned my head toward him, Jake grabbed my shoulders from the side. The movement felt like it might be part of positioning for the photo, but his grip was too firm, too purposeful. "What are you doing?" I started to ask, but my words were cut short as I felt hands pushing against my back. The sensation was so unexpected, so completely outside the realm of what I thought could happen, that my brain couldn't immediately make sense of it. The push wasn't gentle or accidental. It was a deliberate, coordinated shove that sent me backward over the railing with enough force that I had no chance to grab onto anything or regain my balance. As I fell, I could hear Marcus shouting, "It's just a prank, Beverly. Don't be such a baby about it." The 12-foot drop felt like falling through molasses and lightning simultaneously. I had enough time to understand that I was going to hit the concrete patio, enough time to realize that this wasn't a joke that would end with laughter, and enough time to feel a terror so complete that it wiped out every other thought in my mind. The impact was beyond anything I could have imagined. I landed primarily on my back and left side, and the sound my body made hitting the concrete was something I will never forget. It was a wet, cracking noise that seemed to echo from inside my own bones. Pain exploded through my entire body, but most terrifyingly, I couldn't feel anything below my waist. I tried to move my legs and felt nothing. Not numbness, not tingling, but complete absence, as if that part of my body had simply ceased to exist. Panic flooded through me as I attempted to sit up and discovered that I couldn't. My arms worked my head, turned I could see and hear everything around me, but from my torso down, I was completely disconnected from my own body. Above me on the balcony, I could hear urgent whispering. Marcus's voice rose above the others. She fell. She just lost her balance and fell. But I had heard him clearly just moments before admitting it was a prank. The contradiction would have been infuriating if I hadn't been fighting waves of shock and agony. Dad was the first to reach me running around the house from the front door, rather than jumping down from the balcony. But instead of immediately checking if I was okay or calling for help, he stood over me with his hands on his hips and an expression of disgust on his face. "Walk it off. Stop being a baby," he commanded, his voice carrying the same tone he used when I was a child and complained about scraped knees. "Get up, Beverly. You're making a scene and you're embarrassing this family." I tried to explain that I couldn't get up, that something was seriously wrong, but he cut me off with an angry gesture. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Marcus told me what happened. You were showing off near the railing and lost your balance. That's what happens when you don't pay attention." By this time, Mom had come outside, but her first words weren't concern for my well-being. Instead, she looked at me lying motionless on the concrete and said, "Beverly, you are ruining Marcus's birthday. This is supposed to be his special day, and you're turning it into a drama about yourself as usual." The cruelty of their response was almost as shocking as the physical trauma I was experiencing. I lay there unable to move in the worst pain of my life, and my parents were more concerned about appearances and Marcus's birthday than the fact that their daughter might be seriously injured. "I can't feel my legs," I managed to whisper through gritted teeth. "Something's really wrong. I think I need to go to the hospital." "You always think you need to go to the hospital," Mom replied dismissively. "Remember when you were 8 and convinced yourself you had appendicitis because you wanted attention? This is the same thing. You're fine." Marcus appeared beside them, no longer bothering to hide his smirk. "She just wants everyone to feel sorry for her," he said with convincing earnestness. I saw the whole thing from upstairs. She was trying to lean over the railing to wave at someone and just tumbled over. It was totally her own fault. As I lay there listening to my family rewrite the story of what had just happened to me, I realized that they weren't going to help me. They had already decided that this was my fault, that I was being dramatic, and that their main concern was minimizing any disruption to Marcus's celebration. Neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Henderson from next door approached with concern written across her face, but Dad quickly intercepted her. "Everything's fine," he told her with forced cheerfulness. "Beverly just took a little spill. She'll be up and around in no time." But Mrs. Henderson had been a nurse for 30 years before retiring, and she could see things that my family was choosing to ignore. She knelt beside me and began asking questions that actually mattered. Could I feel her touching my legs? Could I wiggle my toes? Could I sense any pain below my waist? When I answered no to all of her questions, she immediately reached for her phone. "I'm calling 911, she announced, and despite Dad's protest that it wasn't necessary, she was already dialing. The wait for the ambulance felt endless, though it probably only took 8 minutes for them to arrive. During that time, I remained motionless on the concrete, while my family continued to minimize what had happened, and Mrs. Henderson stayed beside me, monitoring my condition and offering quiet reassurance. When the paramedics arrived, the lead medic was a woman named Patricia, who appeared to be in her 40s with short gray hair and kind but serious eyes. She immediately took charge of the situation with professional efficiency that stood in stark contrast to my family's chaotic denial. Patricia's first action was to stabilize my neck and spine, placing a cervical collar around my neck and instructing everyone to step back while she conducted her initial assessment. She asked me to rate my pain on a scale of 1 to 10, and when I told her it was an 11 in my back and 0 in my legs because I couldn't feel them, her expression grew more concerned. She tested my reflexes systematically, starting with my arms and working her way down. When she reached my legs, she used a small tool to check for sensation and reflexes. After several attempts with no response, she looked up at her partner with a grim expression that told me everything I needed to know about how serious this was. "Can you tell me exactly what happened here?" Patricia asked, looking directly at me rather than at my parents. Before I could answer, Dad jumped in with the story Marcus had fabricated. She was leaning over the upstairs railing and lost her balance. Just a clumsy accident. We've been telling her she needs to be more careful. But Patricia was examining the scene while he talked, and I could see her taking note of details that didn't match his explanation. She looked up at the balcony, measuring the distance with her eyes, then back at the position where I lay on the concrete. She walked a few steps to examine scuff marks and the pattern of debris that had fallen with me. "Ma'am," she said to me, directly ignoring my parents' continued explanations, "I need you to tell me in your own words what happened. Take your time." Through tears that I had been holding back since the fall, I told her the truth. I explained about the prank videos Marcus had been watching, the coordinated positioning on the balcony, the deliberate push from behind, and Marcus's admission that it was meant to be a joke. I told her about my family's immediate assumption that I was being dramatic and their refusal to take my injuries seriously. Patricia listened to every word without interruption, occasionally nodding or asking for clarification on specific details. Meanwhile, her partner was preparing the specialized backboard they use for potential spinal injuries, and I could see additional emergency vehicles arriving in the distance. "Sir," Patricia addressed my father with a tone that had shifted from professional courtesy to barely contained authority. "I need to inform you that the injuries I'm observing are consistent with a fall from this height, but the mechanism of injury that your daughter described raises some serious concerns. We're going to need to transport her immediately for emergency imaging, and there will likely be some follow-up questions from other agencies." Dad's face flushed red, and he began to argue, but Patricia cut him off firmly. "Right now, my only concern is getting your daughter the medical care she needs. Everything else can be sorted out later." The process of getting me onto the backboard and into the ambulance was both careful and urgent. Patricia explained each step as they immobilized my spine, started an IV, and prepared me for transport. The physical pain was intense, but the emotional pain of watching my parents stand by looking annoyed rather than worried was almost worse. As they loaded me into the ambulance, I heard Patricia speaking quietly into her radio, using codes I didn't understand, but which seemed to trigger additional responses. She climbed into the back with me, while her partner prepared to drive, and once the doors closed, her demeanor became even more serious. "Beverly, I want you to know that I believe what you told me about how this happened," she said as we began moving toward the hospital. "The injury pattern, the mechanism of fall, and several other factors don't support the accident story your family is telling. I've been a paramedic for 15 years, and I've seen situations like this before." She continued monitoring my vital signs and pain levels during the 20-minute ride to Regional Medical Center, but she also asked detailed questions about my family relationships and whether I had ever been hurt by them before. Her questions made me realize that what had happened wasn't just a prank gone wrong, it was a criminal act that had caused me permanent injury. "What happens now?" I asked her, as we pulled into the hospital emergency bay. "Now you get the medical care you need," she replied. "And then some other people are going to want to hear your story. But first, let's focus on getting you stable and finding out the full extent of what we're dealing with." The emergency department at Regional Medical Center moved with controlled urgency once Patricia gave her report to the receiving team. Sarah Mitchell. The attending physician was a woman in her early 50s with prematurely gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that comes from years of making life or death decisions. After a quick but thorough examination that confirmed Patricia's initial findings, Dr. Mitchell ordered immediate CT scans and MRI imaging of my entire spine. The radiology technicians were gentle but efficient as they transferred me from the gurney to the imaging table, taking extreme care to maintain the alignment of my spine throughout the process. While I was in radiology, my parents arrived at the hospital with Marcus in tow. Through the open doorway, I could hear Dad's voice in the hallway alternating between demanding to see me and complaining to anyone who would listen about the overreaction to a simple accident. Mom's voice joined his insisting that I had always been prone to dramatics, and that this was just another example of me seeking attentions, doctor. Mitchell returned to my bedside as the initial CT results became available on her computer screen. Her expression was grave as she pulled up the images and adjusted the monitor so I could see them too. "Beverly, I need to show you what we're looking at here," she said, pointing to the screen with a pen. "This is your lumbar spine, specifically the L2 and L3 vertebrae. Do you see this area here where the bone appears compressed and fragmented?" The images looked like abstract art to me, but I could see the area she was indicating appeared different from the vertebrae above and below it. "What does that mean exactly?" I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. "You have a compression fracture of the L2 vertebra, with fragments extending into the spinal canal. There's also damage to the L3 vertebra and significant swelling around the spinal cord in this region. This type of injury is causing the paralysis in your legs." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to be completely honest with you about what this means for your recovery." The MRI results, which came back an hour later, provided even more detailed information about the damage. The images showed not just the fractured bones, but also the injured spinal cord tissue and the inflammation that was putting additional pressure on the remaining healthy nerves. "The good news," Dr. Mitchell explained, "is that your spinal cord hasn't been completely severed. There's still some tissue connection, which means there's a possibility for some recovery with aggressive treatment and rehabilitation. However, I need you to understand that this is a very serious injury that will likely result in permanent changes to your mobility." While she was explaining my prognosis, I noticed increased activity in the hallway outside my room. A security guard had positioned himself near the door, and I could see people in business attire talking with hospital staff. Dr. Mitchell noticed my attention wandering and followed my gaze. "Beverly, because of the circumstances you described regarding how this injury occurred, the hospital is required to involve law enforcement and social services. A detective will want to speak with you when you're feeling up to it, probably tomorrow after your surgery." Surgery. The word hit me like another physical blow. "We need to operate as soon as possible to remove the bone fragments that are compressing your spinal cord and to stabilize the fractured vertebrae. The longer we wait, the less chance there is for any recovery of function." She sat down beside my bed, her voice becoming more gentle. "I know this is overwhelming, Beverly, but right now we need to focus on giving you the best possible chance for recovery." The surgery was scheduled for early the next morning, which meant a night of fasting and pre-operative preparations. As the evening progressed, my room filled with a steady stream of medical professionals, each explaining their role in my upcoming procedure. The orthopedic surgeon, anesthesiologists, surgical nurses, and physical therapy consultants all came to introduce themselves and answer questions. My parents were eventually allowed to visit, but their behavior in my hospital room was even more disturbing than their response at the scene of the accident. Instead of expressing concern for my condition or remorse about their initial reaction, they seemed primarily focused on controlling the narrative. "The doctors are saying you might have some temporary mobility issues," Dad said, emphasizing the word temporary. "But you've always been strong, and I'm sure you'll bounce back from this quickly once you stop feeling sorry for yourself." Mom chimed in with her own version of support. "We've told everyone that you had an unfortunate accident, and we're hoping this whole situation doesn't become more complicated than it needs to be." Sometimes it's better to just accept that accidents happen and move forward, rather than looking for someone to blame. Their words felt like additional injuries piled on top of the physical trauma I was already experiencing. As they continued to minimize what had happened and subtly pressure me to go along with their version of events, I realized that my relationship with my family had been permanently altered in ways that went far beyond my physical injuries. Marcus stood silently in the corner during their visit, no longer smirking but looking pale and frightened. When our parents stepped out to talk with the nurses about my care, he approached my bed with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Beverly, I didn't mean for this to happen," he whispered urgently. "It was supposed to be funny. You were supposed to just get scared and maybe fall a little bit, not get hurt like this. I'm really sorry." His apology might have meant something if it had been accompanied by a willingness to tell the truth about what had actually happened. Instead, it felt like another manipulation, an attempt to assuage his own guilt without taking real responsibility for the consequences of his actions. The night before my surgery was the longest of my life. Between the physical discomfort, the anxiety about the operation, and the emotional trauma of my family's betrayal, sleep was impossible. I spent those dark hours staring at the ceiling and trying to process how my life had changed so completely in the span of a few seconds. The surgery took 4.5 hours, during which Dr. Mitchell and her orthopedic surgery team worked to remove bone fragments, decompress my spinal cord, and stabilize my fractured vertebrae with titanium rods and screws. I woke up in the recovery room with a new scar running down my lower back, and a complex mixture of hope and dread about what my life would look like going forward. While I was unconscious, Detective Williams from the County Sheriff's Department had arrived at the hospital to begin his investigation. He was a tall, thin man in his early 40s with kind eyes and a methodical approach to gathering information. His first step had been to interview the hospital staff who had been involved in my care, including Patricia the paramedic and Dr. Mitchell. Patricia's report was particularly damaging to my family's version of events. She had documented her observations about the inconsistencies between the claimed accident and the actual evidence at the scene. She had also recorded her conversation with me in the ambulance, where I had described the coordinated nature of Marcus's prank and my parents' immediate dismissal of my injuries. Dr. Mitchell provided medical testimony about the nature of my injuries and their correspondence with the mechanism of trauma I had described. She explained to Detective Williams that the compression fractures and spinal cord damage I had sustained were consistent with a high-impact fall, but would be extremely unlikely to result from simply losing one's balance and tumbling over a railing. The detective's next step was to obtain a warrant to search Marcus's phone and computer for evidence of the prank videos he had been watching and any communications with his friends about planning the incident. What he found exceeded even my expectations of how premeditated the attack had been. Marcus's browser history showed weeks of research into prank videos involving pushing people off elevated surfaces. His text messages with Tyler and Jake revealed detailed planning for what they called the ultimate birthday prank, and discussions about how to position me on the balcony for maximum effect. Most damning of all was a video file on Marcus's phone that showed the actual incident from Tyler's perspective. The video clearly showed Marcus giving the signal, Tyler and Jake grabbing and pushing me, and my terrified scream as I fell backward over the railing. It also captured Marcus's immediate laughter and his comment about it being just a prank before the reality of my injuries became apparent. The footage was unambiguous evidence that what had happened was not an accident but a planned assault. Armed with this evidence, Detective Williams arrested Marcus on charges of aggravated assault and reckless endangerment. Tyler and Jake were also taken into custody as accomplices. But the investigation didn't stop there, because the detective had also documented my parents' behavior both at the scene and in the hospital. Robert and Janet were arrested on charges of child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and failure to provide necessary medical care. The prosecution argued that their immediate dismissal of my obvious injuries and their attempts to prevent me from receiving medical attention constituted criminal negligence that had potentially worsened my condition. The arrests made local news, and the story quickly gained traction on social media as details about the prank video and my parents' response became public. The community response was overwhelmingly supportive of me and outraged at my family's behavior. A GoFundMe campaign started by my teaching colleagues raised over $50,000 for my medical expenses and rehabilitation needs. But the legal consequences were only part of the aftermath I had to navigate. The more immediate challenge was beginning the long process of learning to live with my injuries and adjusting to a completely different physical reality. My first session with the physical therapy team was both encouraging and sobering. The therapist explained that while the surgery had been successful in stabilizing my spine and relieving pressure on my spinal cord, the damage that had already occurred was largely permanent. I would need to learn to use a wheelchair and adapt my living situation to accommodate my new mobility limitations. The occupational therapist, an energetic woman named Lisa, who had been working with spinal cord injury patients for over a decade, helped me understand that my life wasn't over, just different. She showed me adaptive equipment and techniques that would allow me to maintain independence in most areas of my daily life. She also connected me with other patients who had similar injuries and had gone on to lead fulfilling lives. Over the following weeks, I began to rebuild my strength and learn new skills. The physical rehabilitation was challenging but measurable. Each day I could transfer from my bed to the wheelchair a little more smoothly, navigate obstacles with more confidence, and perform daily tasks with greater ease. The emotional rehabilitation was more complex. I had to process not just the trauma of the injury itself, but also the betrayal by my family and the complete upheaval of everything I had believed about their love and loyalty. The hospital's victim advocate, a compassionate woman named Sandra, helped me work through these feelings and connect with counseling resources for long-term support. 3 months after the incident, my family's criminal trials began. I chose not to attend the proceedings, but I followed the outcomes through my victim advocate. Marcus was sentenced to 2 years in juvenile detention, followed by 3 years of supervised probation. Tyler and Jake received lighter sentences as accomplices, but were also required to complete community service and counseling. My parents' trial was more complex because their crimes were less obvious but potentially more serious. The prosecution successfully argued that their failure to seek immediate medical care for me and their attempts to cover up the circumstances of my injury had constituted criminal negligence. Robert was sentenced to 5 years in prison, while Janet received 3 years due to her slightly lesser role in the obstruction of justice. The civil lawsuit that followed resulted in a substantial settlement that would help cover my ongoing medical expenses and adaptive equipment needs. More importantly, it provided a legal acknowledgement that what had happened to me was not an accident but a criminal act that had permanently altered my life. 1 year after Marcus's birthday party, I was living in my own adapted apartment and had returned to teaching at the elementary school where I had worked before the incident. My classroom had been modified with ramps and adjustable height furniture, and my students had embraced my wheelchair as just another part of who I was. The children, with their natural honesty and curiosity, had asked direct questions about my disability that adults often avoided. I found their straightforward approach refreshing compared to the tiptoeing and pity I encountered from some adults. When 6-year-old Emma asked me if my legs were broken, I was able to explain in simple terms that they just worked differently now, and she accepted that explanation without any further drama. My relationships had changed dramatically over the past year. I had lost the family I thought I knew, but I had gained a chosen family of friends, colleagues, and fellow members of the disability community who understood and supported me in ways my biological family never had. My friend Sarah from the spinal cord support group had become like a sister to me, and my colleague Maria had helped me adapt my teaching methods to work from a wheelchair. I had also met David, not my ex-boyfriend, but a different David who was a physical therapist at the rehabilitation center. Our relationship had developed slowly from professional interactions to friendship to something deeper. He understood my physical limitations not as obstacles to overcome, but as simply part of who I was. For the first time in my life, I felt truly accepted and valued for exactly who I was. The legal proceedings had finally concluded, and while I felt vindicated by the outcomes, I found that justice hadn't brought me the peace I had expected. The anger I had carried for months began to transform into something more complex. I wasn't ready to forgive my family, and I might never be, but I was ready to stop letting their betrayal define my future. I had started speaking at support groups for other trauma survivors, sharing my story. Not for sympathy, but to demonstrate that devastating betrayals don't have to destroy your capacity for happiness. My experience had taught me that sometimes the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you most, but it had also shown me that resilience can be found in unexpected places. The physical limitations that had initially felt like the end of everything gradually became just one aspect of a life that was fuller and more authentic than it had ever been before. I was no longer the person who accepted poor treatment because I believed family loyalty required it. I had learned to value myself enough to surround myself only with people who treated me with genuine respect and care. My teaching had also evolved to incorporate lessons about standing up for yourself, recognizing unhealthy family dynamics, and understanding that you don't owe loyalty to people who harm you. I couldn't explicitly discuss my own situation with my elementary students, but I could teach them about personal boundaries and the difference between people who care about your well-being and people who only care about what you can do for them. The GoFundMe campaign had exceeded all expectations, raising over $75,000 that not only covered my medical expenses, but also allowed me to make a substantial donation to the Spinal Cord Research Foundation. Knowing that my tragedy might contribute to preventing or treating similar injuries for other people gave additional meaning to everything I had endured. I had also reconnected with Mrs. Henderson, the retired nurse, who had recognized the severity of my injuries and called for emergency help despite my parents' objections. She had become like a grandmother figure to me, checking on my progress and celebrating my achievements as I rebuilt my life. Her quick thinking and willingness to act against my family's wishes had quite literally saved my life. The community support had been overwhelming in the best possible way. Local businesses had donated adaptive equipment, church groups had provided meals during my initial recovery, and strangers had sent cards and letters of encouragement. I had discovered that there were far more good people in the world than bad ones, and that kindness from strangers could heal wounds that family cruelty had created. As I reflected on the year that had passed, I realized that while I would never be grateful for what had happened to me, I could be grateful for what it had taught me about my own strength and about the difference between toxic relationships and healthy ones. The family I had been born into had shown me cruelty disguised as love, but the family I had chosen for myself showed me what genuine care and support actually looked like. Sometimes people asked me if I missed my family, and the honest answer was complicated. I missed the fantasy of having parents who would protect and support me, but I didn't miss the reality of parents who had prioritized appearances over my well-being and had dismissed my pain as attention-seeking behavior. I missed the idea of having a brother who would be my ally and friend, but I didn't miss the reality of Marcus's manipulative and dangerous behavior. The path forward was still challenging. I would always have physical limitations, I would always carry the emotional scars of betrayal, and I would always wonder what my life might have been like if my family had chosen to love me instead of harm me. But I had learned that healing doesn't require forgetting or forgiving, it requires choosing to build something better from the pieces that remain. My story had become one of survival and resilience, rather than just tragedy and loss. I had discovered that you can create your own family from people who choose to love and support you, and that sometimes losing the people you thought you needed makes room for the people you actually deserve to have in your life. The most important lesson I learned was that family isn't defined by blood or obligation, but by mutual care, respect, and genuine love. Some people are fortunate enough to be born into families that provide these things naturally. Others, like me, have to learn to recognize the difference between healthy and toxic relationships, and then be brave enough to choose health even when it means walking away from people who share your DNA. If you've experienced betrayal by family members, please share your story in the comments below. It helps all of us to know we're not alone in these experiences. Hit the like button if this story resonated with you, and subscribe for more content about overcoming life's biggest challenges. Don't forget to share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from the people in their lives. Thank you for listening to my story, and for being part of a community that believes in healing growth and the power of choosing your own family. Remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, especially not by how your family treats you. You deserve love, respect, and care, and if you're not getting those things from the people closest to you, it's okay to seek them elsewhere. Sometimes the most painful experiences in our lives teach us the most valuable lessons about who we really are and what we're capable of surviving. I hope that if you're facing your own challenges with family relationships or recovering from trauma, you'll remember that healing is possible and that you have more strength than you know.